And thinking in a big picture of all sentient beings having once been our kind parents, and reared us with so much love and patience and affection, then let's look on all others with eyes of kindness as well and seek to repay what they've given to us through practicing the Dharma. And specifically how we repay them through our Dharma practice is by purifying our mind and gaining the realizations so that we can become a Buddha, so that while we're on the path and after we've attained the result, we will intuitively and spontaneously know what to do that will be of the greatest benefit to others. So with an awareness of their kindness and awareness of our own potential, let's generate that bodhicitta motivation. So yesterday we were talking about one of the two ways to generate bodhicitta, the 7 points of 7-point instruction of cause and effect. And so in that way of generating bodhicitta, the way we develop the view of sentient beings as lovable and kind is through having seen them as having been our parents in previous lives. Okay? So this, it's important for us to, deliberately cultivate this view of them having been kind. We have to change how we look at sentient beings. Because if we don't, if we just hold our ordinary view, it's going to be very difficult to wish them well and wish them to be free of suffering, because always the mind that is going to come back of, well, what have they ever done for me that I should work so hard for them? You know that mind? So that's why, we spend a lot of time really cultivating the view of them as kind. Also, because when we can train our mind to see others as kind, it's extremely helpful in our day-to-day life. Because then the whole way we approach others is completely different. Yeah? Because if we approach others with the assumption that they're kind and they're friendly, then just how we interact them from the get-go is different than if we hold the assumption that they're not to be trusted and they've harmed us and they could harm us again. Okay? Can you see this just even in your own daily life? How when you go into situations with well, who are these people? I don't know if I can trust them, and maybe they're going to do a number on me. If you go in with that kind of feeling, even though you may not be consciously aware of it, it becomes like a wish-fulfilling prophecy, because the way we relate to the people is very rough. Okay? Whereas if we go in with a mind seeing them as kind, the way we relate to them is in a very gentle way. Okay? So when we relate to people in a rough way, they're going to respond that way, aren't they? If we relate to people in a kind way, they're going to probably respond that way too. Okay? So a lot of this, how we relate to people at the beginning influences how they, respond. And how we relate to them at the beginning comes, via our assumptions about the situation. Okay? So this is why it's so important to really spend time changing our view of sentient beings, to see them as kind, to see them as lovable. Okay? So it might be good in your meditation, do a little checking on this, and, you know, kind of what is my usual approach to sentient beings? Yeah? Do I usually go into situations kind of trusting them? Do I go in on my guard? Do I go in, you know, suspicious and suspecting they're going to harm me? And of course, different situations will probably go in differently. But think of a variety of different situations and how we go into them and how that affects our behavior and thus how it affects other people's responses. Okay, so do a little bit of checking on that. It can be very interesting. Because lots of times we don't even have a clue about how we're coming off to other people. You know, we think that we're coming off as just being fine and friendly. Meanwhile, we're talking in a big loud voice and sitting up straight and, you know, really letting them know how they need to talk to us. But we don't have any idea about that. You know, we're totally unaware of our body language and our tone of voice. And we think we're coming off in a very gentle, friendly way. Okay, so what usually happens is we are so at that time wrapped up in our emotion that introspective alertness, that watchful mind that is observing ourselves is out to lunch. And so we don't have any idea how we're coming across. You know? And then we're so puzzled why people respond to us the way they do. We just don't get it. Okay? So, you know, here is where the introspective alertness and the mindfulness are extremely important. So this is just in our day-to-day life, okay? But, you know, especially in our spiritual path, you know, to cultivate this view of others as lovable, as kind. Yeah, so when we look out, we look out to beings who are lovable. Okay, this doesn't mean seeing them as lovable doesn't mean we trust everybody in every situation. Don't get these things confused. Okay, we see them as lovable because they've been kind to us in the past, because they have kindness in them. It doesn't mean that in every situation we should trust them. Okay? For example, if you trusted me to fly your plane to take you to New York City, that would be not so wise. Okay? Now that doesn't mean I'm not lovable. But, you know, I strongly advise you don't trust me to fly a jet plane. Okay? So, in the same way, you know, we can see what people have what skills, okay, and what people have what kind of habitual behavior, and, you know, have some provisional temporary guidelines about that, but still see them as a sentient being who's lovable. Okay? So this whole thing of trust is very difficult for us. We get very confused. And I think one key is to think to what extent or in which ways can we trust different people. Okay. Now, you might trust an adult with matches, but you don't trust a 2-year-old with matches. Doesn't mean the 2-year-old is a bad person. Okay, it just means they don't have that competency, so you don't trust them in that area. Okay, so in the same way in our workings with different people, according to people's level of skill in a certain area, you know, according to their usual way of behaving, you know, we can make assessments about who to trust in different ways. Okay, But that's very different than saying across the board one sentient being is not trustworthy in any way whatsoever. And it's very different than similarly saying across the board some other sentient being is trustworthy 100% of the time. Because those assumptions that somebody's always trustworthy in every situation, that's what leads us to a lot of disillusionment and disappointment. Because when we do that, we forget that they're sentient beings with afflictions. Yeah? And when we stop expecting sentient beings who have afflictions to act like sentient beings who have afflictions, and instead expect them to act like Buddhas, then, we're going to be in for some hard times. Okay. So it's a whole thing of, standing back and really seeing in which specific areas, and to which extent do we trust different people at different times in different situations. But at the same time, throughout all of that, we can still see them as kind. Okay? I think a lot of our judgment of them as being unkind comes because we have often trusted them, given them trust in areas in which they could not bear that trust. Okay? So we gave them more trust than they could bear. Then we were disappointed. Then we think that they aren't lovable. Okay? But that's a faulty way of going about things. Okay? When we see sentient beings as lovable, our heart is open towards them. Yeah? Then whoever we see, it's like, oh, I'm happy to see that person. Whereas when we have a mind with a lot of bias, oh, this person is so wonderful, then we only want to be with that wonderful person. And when we're not with them, we're miserable. We're daydreaming about being with them. And then we can't enjoy the other people we are with because our mind is, halfway around the world. Oh, but I want to be with him. But we're not. The reality is we're with who we're with. Okay? So that kind of biased mind makes it very difficult for us to actually enjoy the people we're with. It takes us very much out of the present and into the past, longing to be with somebody else, recreate a situation from the past, or longing to create some kind of glorious situation in the future. In the meantime, what is going completely by us, and we are zoned out, living in our own little internal world. Do you see yourselves doing that sometimes? Yeah? Totally zoned out. Okay? So try and come back to where we are. And this view of sentient beings as kind helps us to be in this present moment. Okay? And I know regarding this, one time when I was in India, there was what my teacher called an enlightenment experience celebration. So for 3 months there was a group of 100 and some of us together all the time doing all these Dharma things. And some of you might think that everybody who's a Dharma practitioner, or everybody who's a monastic, thinks the same way. We have very different personalities. Yeah. And the thing is, when you live in a monastery, sometimes you're with people who, if you lived and worked at home, that had an outside job and lived at home, people you wouldn't even associate with. Okay? But in a monastery, you're living with them, 24/7. So I gave myself the little task of, during that 3 months, having a good conversation with each of those people. That was my homework assignment to myself. And so I said I was going to find something interesting to talk about with each of those people There's got to be something that with each of them I can have a good conversation. So it's a very, very interesting experience for me, because I just nudged myself to go up and start talking to people that I wouldn't normally talk to, because I had some kind of preconceived opinion about them. But I made myself get over that and go up and, talk to them and find some topic that was of interest to them and to me. And it was very rewarding. I learned so much, and it really put me at ease with this large group of people afterwards, because I knew each one of them. Okay? So these, you might try that kind of homework assignment to yourself sometimes. Go and talk to somebody who your mind usually says, they're not my type of person. Okay. And just try and have, a good conversation. Find something they're interested in that you're interested in too. Or just, sometimes asking people about their lives. It's fascinating what kind of life experiences they've gone through, that we don't know until we start to talk to them and inquire about their life. Okay? So all these things kind of loosen up our preconceptions about others. Now, in the way of cultivating bodhicitta, in the method of equalizing and exchanging self and others, there's a different approach to see the kindness of others. Okay? In the other method, the 7 points of cause and effect, is through seeing sentient beings as our dear mother. So there still could be a little bit of, self-centeredness in there because they were our mother. Yeah. Whereas in this other method of equalizing and exchanging self and others, we're not seeing them as having been our parents or any kind of relative to us. But we're just seeing that through their very existence in this universe, through their doing what they do in their career or whatever, even if they don't have a career, whatever thing they're doing in their life, that in some way we are interrelated and we are deriving some benefit from them. Okay? So this way of looking at things really opens our mind to a much more global perspective of our interdependence. Now, I know in many ways we are more aware of that. When people are wear their shoes, when you get Nike shoes, you are more aware of, were these made in Brazil with child labor? Or what's the situation under which these things were made? Okay? And so we become more aware sometimes of outsourcing and the work situations of other people when we buy goods. But so that's, a step in that direction of seeing our interdependence. But this is going further than that and seeing that the things that we use were made in other countries, and we don't even know the people who made them. And so many people were involved in making them. Yeah, they were made in some kind of factory. You have all the workers in the factory, each doing their own specific job. Then you have all the management of the factory who are planning and organizing the whole thing. Then you have all the people involved in transporting the goods, either by ship or plane or road. You have all the people involved in placing them on the shelves in the store, the people involved in building the store that we go to, and the people involved in building the vehicles that transported them, and the people involved in building the factories where they were made. And as we look on, we see this incredible network of sentient beings who are all involved in us getting a pair of shoes or a shirt or even salad for lunch. Okay? And so when we stop to reflect on that, you know, we see, wow, my having all these things to use and enjoy, all these things that keep me alive, that make me happy and make me able to do the things I want to do, all these things come due to the kindness of others. Yeah. And then if the mind says, but they weren't kind, they were just doing this to earn a living, yeah. Well, in the back of our mind, when we say that, we're thinking, they aren't thinking of me specially when they're doing this. In other words, they're only kind when they're thinking of me as, you know, distinguished from everybody else. Well, okay. They don't have to be thinking of us specially for us to receive their kindness. Okay? Just the bottom line is that whatever they're doing, we're receiving benefit from it. So whether they have us specifically in mind, whether they know us personally, you know, in one way or another, yeah, we wouldn't have what we have if it weren't due to their efforts. Okay? And so to really open our mind up and see that and appreciate it. Really think about what all of that means and how dependent we are on others and how kind they've been. And like I always say, I think now we are more dependent on others than ever before in history. You know, because previous times people built their own houses and, you know, they could make their own clothes a little bit easier, grow their own food or whatever. But now society is so individualized in terms of our careers that, you know, we hardly know how to do anything for ourselves. You know, we don't know how to sew, we don't know how to grow the cotton, we don't know how to make the synthetic fibers. Yeah, we don't know how to drive the semi-truck that transports them, or how to drive the tractor that, you know, plants the cotton seeds, and, you know, all these kinds of things. We don't know how to rear sheep so that we have a nice soft sweater. Yeah. We don't know how to build buildings, you know, to do everything that's involved in building a building ourselves. Okay? So we're so dependent on others. And just realizing this, you know, being aware of their kindness. Okay. Think of all the medicines that we take for our body. Do we know how to make those medicines? Even your eyeglasses or your contact lenses. Do you know how to make your own glasses? How to do a prescription for yourself? Okay? So in so many ways, we're completely dependent on others. And, you know, they have been kind to us. So this kind of meditation, I think, is very good for stretching us beyond our socioeconomic categories. You know, because so often people tend to hang out with people who are of their same socioeconomic category, or people who are of the same education level as them. And we grow up with different ideas about people from different classes or different education levels or different parts of the town, okay, let alone different races or different ethnic groups and so on. Okay, we grow up with all sorts of ideas, and often simply because of lack of contact, we have some hesitancy about being with others. But when we do this meditation about, you know, the kindness of others for doing whatever work they do in our society, that definitely leads us far, far beyond our own socioeconomic group, our own educational group, our own neighborhood. Okay? It leads us into, the inner city. It leads us into the suburbs. It leads us into the estates. It leads us into other countries. Yeah, and the social systems there. So, it really makes our mind quite large to think of how we've benefited from what other people have done. Okay? So to really cultivate that all the time. Yeah? So it could be from things like when you see people up on the telephone poles, adjusting the telephone lines, thanking them. Okay? When you see them digging up the earth to lay the electric lines, thanking them and appreciating them. When you see them working on the road, instead of cursing at them because it slows you down, thanking them and appreciating what they do. Yeah, even when you see somebody making lunch here, or somebody, washing your plate after you've eaten, or somebody vacuuming the floor, or somebody working in the garden, to really see that we all benefit from each other's labors and energies. And so to have a feeling of kindness towards those other people. Yeah. So this cuts through a lot of our feeling of entitlement and a lot of our taking things for granted. Yeah, we tend so much to take things for granted. I think especially as Americans, whatever I want should be immediately available at the store. Yeah, immediately. It should be there waiting for me to buy it. Okay? And so this is coming very much from this view of entitlement, that I am entitled to everything I want. And I think even more so now, with the way people are buying on credit and not at all planning their finances very wisely, they're really living with this sense of entitlement. I want it, I go and get it. Forget how to pay about it. I don't have to worry about how to pay for it. Who thinks about how to pay for it? Just put it on the credit card. Yeah? And then we don't see what a big jam we're getting ourselves into by being in credit card debt. Okay, but we're just operating on this sense of entitlement of whatever I want, I should be able to have immediately. I shouldn't have to work for it. I shouldn't have to save up for it. I shouldn't have to forego some pleasure in order to get something that's really important for me. It should be immediately accessible. Why? Because I'm me. That's the only reason. Yeah. It's the only, do you have any other reason why you feel entitled to have everything you want? The only reason is because I'm me. Yeah, and I'm very important. In fact, more important than everybody else. And the world should just understand that. Okay? So here we see the functions of the self-centered mind. So it's interesting to think, how in different societies you might have the self-centered mind manifesting in slightly different ways, according to the culture, the economic situation, the political situation, and so on. But in all societies, the self-centered mind runs rampant. Okay? So we may not be able to correct everybody else's self-centered mind, although we sure try hard to. Yeah. But the one person whose self-centered mind we can do something about, we tend to offer that person a lot of cuts, and a lot of excuses. And that person just happens to be ourselves. Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with my self-centered mind, but there's everything wrong with everybody else's self-centered mind, especially when it conflicts with what I want. Yeah. Then they're the ones who are being extremely stubborn, while I'm just being so kind and flexible. There's two ways in which you can please me, A and B. I'm very flexible. Okay. So spend some time in your meditation, and spend some time as you're walking around during the day too. Looking at people and seeing who's doing what kind of tasks around here. And think of the different people who were involved in, having the building here, or in the Abbey existing and being able to get the land. Yeah. And just kind of open your mind and have a sense of appreciation for those people. And when your mind starts saying, okay, they were kind, but, okay, yes, they, did this and this and this and this, by which I get some benefit, but, they also do this and they don't do that, and they do this, and yeah. And the complaining mind starts in with the federal indictment of all of their faults, okay? Just like the FBI, surveys people and, gathers evidence. So we're always on the lookout for what people are doing that doesn't please us, and we register it in our files so that when we need some ammunition to get back at them, we have it. Yeah. And so that we don't forget our ammunition, we, from time to time, recite the catalog of everything that they've done that we don't like. Yeah. So we're doing our chanting after lunch, but inside we're reciting something else. Okay. So, when stop the mind that says yes, but, and just say, I'm not thinking about their faults, I'm thinking about their good qualities. And in any cases, their good qualities far outnumber their faults. Okay. I mean, it's very clear. If sentient beings' meanness outweighed their kindness, we would not be alive right now. Okay. We're alive because their kindness towards us outweighs, whatever meanness they may have shown. And remember, the meanness is a reflection of their internal suffering, so there's no reason to get mad at them. And it's also a reflection of our own negative karma, that we're inviting this harm due to our negative karma. So again, no reason to get mad at them. Okay, so this way of thinking is taught in the meditation on equalizing self and others. And it's very good to spend some time with it and see how it helps you change your mind. And especially if there's somebody that you're having problems with. Yeah, your husband or wife or your boss or employees or whoever it is, spend some time thinking of their kindness towards you. Yeah? And in that way, you come to see them in a different light and to approach them in a different light. And you may still have problems to work out, but our approach and our whole feeling about them is completely different. Okay, any questions or comments about this? Yeah.
You said that certain point cause and effect can possibly, have, we could possibly do it with some self-centeredness based on the fact that it's based on our, someone's relationship to us. But with equalizing and exchanging self and others, we're still talking about how those people benefit us. So isn't that just the same?
Oh, okay. So isn't it just the same whether they're our parents or whether they benefit us? In
the sense that we could turn that into a self-centered.
That we could turn that into self-centered. Okay. In that sense that we're receiving benefit from somebody, it's similar. But in the sense that this person was my mother and the attachment that, or my father and the attachment that usually automatically comes with that, there it's quite different. Yeah, because in equalizing and exchanging self and others, we're thinking of their kindness also when they've been strangers and we haven't even known them. Okay, so it's a different kind of thing. Yeah, less likely to be infused with attachment.
I was thinking about your comment about trust. And that it's about competency and skillfulness. And if we can't trust someone to recognize that they have afflictions. So my question is, how do we apply this in interpersonal relationships, kind of on the ground, because I can see going in two unhelpful directions, and one would be to be patronizing. Oh, they just have afflictions. So not to go to that extreme, and then the other extreme being denying our own reactions in a way that's really unhelpful. Going right to that teaching and not staying with what we're experiencing.
Okay, so the question is, couldn't this thing of seeing others as kind lead to some blindness on our part? Okay, so one of them was, what was the first one you said about patronizing? Oh yeah, they're kind, but they do all these mean things because they have afflictions. These poor slobs with afflictions. Well, if we think like that, we're really having quite a narrow view because we also have afflictions. So, we're not separating others out and patronizing and looking at condescension. Oh, they do all these stupid things because they have afflictions. Well, I have afflictions too. And then we have to ask ourselves, am I always so trustworthy? In all these things, it's very good. Constantly flip the situations. Yeah, I have issues with who I trust. Are these people trustworthy? But then to look, how trustworthy am I? When I say I'm going to do something, do I always do it? When I'm expected to be somewhere, am I always there? Do I always speak kindly to other people, or do I get in bad moods and speak abrasively? All these kinds of things, we always have to flip them and apply them to ourselves. Okay? And if we do that, then it's very humbling. And then there's no space for patronizing. Okay, then your other qualm was, if we just practice seeing people as kind, then couldn't we be ignoring what our feelings are? Okay? We need to be aware of what our feelings are, but also realize that when we're feeling attachment and when we're feeling aversion and when we're feeling apathy, that those feelings are based on afflictions. Those are deluded feelings. So we need to be aware of them for the purpose of applying the antidote and releasing them. Not for the purpose of, I feel this, and staying stuck in that feeling, which is what we often tend to do. There's some interpersonal thing that happens, somebody says something, I feel hurt and offended, And, okay, I'm very in touch with my feelings. I've got to be, because we've got to be in touch with our feelings nowadays, right? If you're not in touch with your feelings, kind of something's wrong. So I'm in touch with my feelings. I feel so hurt. I feel so offended. I feel so hurt. I feel offended. I feel hurt. I feel offended. And it becomes so solid in our own minds. And we think that that's fine, that's the meaning of being in touch with our feelings. Okay, does that have any benefit? I don't think so. Okay, so if we realize, okay, I'm hurt, yeah, I'm offended, I'm making up this story about them, but that's not who they are. My story is not who the other person is. And I don't want to stay in this state of being hurt and offended. No. And my hurt and my being offended is so intricately related to my own self-centeredness. Because if that same person did the same thing to somebody I don't like, I wouldn't be hurt and offended at all. I would be applauding them. Okay? So, we have to really understand what does it mean to be in touch with our feelings and why are we in touch with our feelings? Okay? We have to be in touch with them, otherwise they run the show and we have no opportunity to question them and doubt them. But if we just accept our feelings as the only possible way that anybody in their right mind could respond, then we're buying into a view of affliction, a view of delusion. And that's not helpful to us at all. Mm-hmm.
I'm glad she asked that, but I'd kind of like to go a little farther because I know a person, a friend of a friend of a friend. I see it very similar, and I have had no experience with him whatsoever, but he sets up, not on a feeling level, but on a visceral level, he sets up my inner watchdog. And if he is closer than about as close as Mary Grace, my inner watchdog says, that guy is way too close, he cannot be trusted at all from the very beginning. And I have no experience with him, but I trust my inner watchdog. Because I do have some experience with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost never feel that way about people, but when it happens, I kind of feel like I have to pay attention to that.
Yeah. Okay, so our inner watchdog, that for no reason feels unsafe around somebody and feels that somebody else is menacing or threatening, even though we really haven't had much experience with them. Okay, so to what extent do we listen to that mind? Okay. Well, I first think we have to acknowledge it's there. But then, I think it's good to sometimes question that mind a little bit, instead of always believing it. Because if we were in a different situation with that same person, we would have a very different mind. And I say this in the sense that when I lived in India, there were people I would run into, Westerners, who I would go, I don't, feel so comfortable around that person. But it's very interesting when you're traveling in India, and if you're alone and there's another Westerner on that train with you, or on that bus, the two of you team up. Yeah, because you're both similar in not knowing the language, not knowing the culture. Things get stolen so easily when you're there. So even if the person is someone you don't know, even if it's somebody that before you had that inner watchdog feeling for, that is gone in that situation. And the two of you help each other. And you stick together on that journey. Yeah? And I've seen that happen many, many times, and it's quite amazing. And it always reminds me, don't, make things too rigid. because in different circumstances, the relationship can be completely different. And so even in the situation where I may feel some aversion for that person, I might then even try talking to them. If I felt they were physically menacing, I wouldn't talk to them in a deserted place. But I would certainly talk to them with other people around, and then have some experience and see what they're like before buying into some of those feelings. Because some of those feelings could be influenced by previous karma, by previous preconception. Some of them may have some validity, but I don't know about you, I don't always trust my so-called intuition. Yeah? I don't always trust it. Because I've seen that sometimes my quote intuition is, it comes up with things that, sometimes it's trustworthy, so I have to figure out when it's trustworthy, but sometimes it's just making stories. Yeah.
You cannot either disregard it or go with it, either one.
Exactly. You can't disregard it and you can't blindly follow it.
Well, that's
Yep.
I wanted to share something that happened this past week, which was an indication of how my mind works and that there has been some improvement. We had a person come to do offering service this weekend, and he came up to me, and he was a big man with a big truck and a big trailer, big boots, just big presence. And I was going to go up to the forest with him. And so we're going up the trail, and he's talking about how he used to be a conservative, right-wing, fundamentalist, born-again Christian.
Oh.
And, my immediate, the SMK response is like, Sandy, get your watchdog alert out. And then I said, you know this stereotype in your mind, and since you've lived here at the Abbey, and have lived in this community of Newport, that the biggest, burliest guys have been the biggest puppy dogs that you've ever met, the kindest hearts. I mean, John Perry's a big example. So we went into the forest, and in the next hour and a half, this man showed one of the most transparent, soft. The first thing that he said that changed it for me, he said, when I finally started to get an education and started to have some critical thinking, I applied it to my spiritual path, and I realized that I was on the wrong path. That Jesus would never, ever confine his path to just this small spiritual life. Then he was cutting down a tree, and he got it hung up in the trees. And he had to come over and help me because he didn't know what to do. He said, my macho side of me from a few years ago would have just let me figure this out on my own, but I decided to ask for help. And then coming back to the Abbey, he says, I said, what are you doing now? What are you going to do now? Because he has a bad back and can't do his landscape. He says, I'm going into social work because I really want to be able to experience the suffering of others and to do what I can to benefit them as much as I can. And it was the whole stereotype of born-again, fundamentalist, Christian thing. And to see this glorious human being who has a heart of gold, and to see me being able to let it go, to not use that, because he had himself defined, and you could see how he had taken that identity and had just blown it out of the water. And to give him that space to just be who he was. And it was just one of the most delightful mornings I've had here. And I've had a lot of delightful mornings. So it was an improvement on my part on not getting stuck and then holding myself at bay and not letting him be who he really was growing into. And he felt safe here being able to do that, which was the other nice piece.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's quite amazing. We get all sorts of people here. Like all of you. No, but it's it's really good. I mean, we get so many different kinds of people come up and visit us. And it's very, very good for breaking down those preconceptions. Yeah. Okay, let me at least try and do one verse. Okay, so verse 47. Although spirits have spells that can harm beings in all sorts of ways, it is your blessing, great mercy, that transform these spells into beneficial things. So I think this must refer to some story from the Buddha's life. I can't think of a specific story about a spirit. There's probably something in one of the Jataka tales. But in any case, what it reminds me of, is of somebody who wants to harm, but because of the Buddha's great compassion, transform that into something beneficial. So the story that came to mind for me was, the Buddha had one cousin, Devadatta, who was really obnoxious and did so many things. He's appearing all throughout the sutras as just being quite contrary. And he was rivaling the Buddha. He wanted to do away with the Buddha so that he could be the leader of the Sangha. And so he, at one point, released a wild elephant so that the wild elephant would go charge the Buddha and trample him and kill him. And then he, Devadatta, could take control of the Sangha. So this wild elephant, completely crazed, is charging towards the Buddha. And can you just imagine the scene, And probably everybody's freaking out all around. And the Buddha just stays there very calm. And by the power of his loving kindness, when the elephant approached him, the elephant stopped charging and actually knelt down and paid respect to the Buddha. So the story goes. Okay? So I think there's something quite beautiful about this, that just by the power of the Buddha's loving kindness, this crazed elephant, was tamed. So just by the power often of somebody's compassion, other people's afflictions and, very deluded behavior can be subdued. Mm-hmm. And you see this sometimes that, when we show some understanding to somebody, it completely changes the way of the way they're acting. Yeah? And I know I was reading Nonviolent Communication once, one of Marshall Rosenberg's books, and he was talking about situations in which people tried to apply empathy in difficult situations. And it was quite remarkable, some of the stories that the people told him of when, forget compassion, but just empathy, of understanding somebody's pain. Yeah, and expressing that empathy, and just what that itself does to calm down somebody who could potentially be dangerous or crazed. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's talking about the force of compassion. And we can see this often in our lives, that, if we are compassionate and have a kind side, it soothes other people, whereas if we go into a situation really defensive, other people get their defenses up as well. Now, it's very interesting when I go to prisons and I say this kind of thing. They say, yes, but you don't know what it's really like here. If we go to commissary and we get our stuff and I'm walking back to my cell with my stuff and somebody else accosts me, you're telling me to give him my stuff. If I do that, he's going to next week be waiting there for me. Or you're telling me that if somebody, you know, butts in line in front of me, that I should let them do that, because if I let them do that, they're going to see me as a pushover, and then, you know, they're going to torment me after that. And what I do is I respond, you know, there's ways, different ways of showing the same behavior. And remember, compassion is our internal feeling. It's not the behavior. Yeah. So in the example of somebody cutting in line, cutting in front of you in the chow line, which is a big thing, and you can have whole brawls about it. There's a way of being intimidated by somebody who cuts in front of you, so that you feel frightened and it's intimidated, and you say, oh yeah, go ahead, you know, to placate the guy. And that guy's going to feel your fear. And that guy, you know, feeds on the fear. But if you have a sense of your own dignity, and you say, please, come in the line, that guy's going to sense that you aren't afraid and that you have a sense of your own dignity. Okay? And so a completely different relationship is going to ensue. Yeah. So when we're talking about compassion here, we're not talking about fearing somebody and caving in and giving them what they want. That's not the meaning of compassion. Yeah. When we have compassion, we have a sense of our own dignity. Not of arrogance, because if we come on arrogantly with somebody, they're going to pick up on that. But if we have a sense of our own, you know, dignity and a sense of self-respect as a human being, and have that same self-respect for somebody else, yeah, that can very easily diffuse a situation. Yeah. And so other guys from the prisons have written me many stories telling me of how they've diffused potentially dangerous situations by practicing in this kind of way. Okay.
Can you relate something?
Let me, there was one that James told me. Let me pull it out so I tell you all the details very well. Okay, otherwise I'll screw it up. But yeah. Mm-hmm.
I once worked in a prison teaching a class in Chicago, and when I went in there, I just went in. I wanted to help them. I was like, I just want to help you guys, and so I gave a project so that they would benefit from that project, and we worked on it while I was instructing them. And at the end of I was like a relief teacher for 6 weeks. At the end of the period, the guys came up. Oh, by the way, during that period, there was a killing in the yard. Mm-hmm. And so they, you know, I said, I hear there was a killing in the yard. How did it happen? And the guys told me how it had occurred. And I, you know, I had a choice. I could run up and go to the screws and say, I still wouldn't know who had done it, but I could tell them how it had been accomplished. But I thought, I really, you know, I have got these guys' trust. I'm just going to remain silent, so I didn't tell the screws about it. And at the end of the 6-week period, they came up to me and they said, they had knives. They said, you know, you're a fool. You're trusting us with 3 murders here, and you've been trusting us all the time. But we like you. And we made this knife. We just want to show you that we could have killed you at any time. And they went over to the shears and they cut the knife and threw the blade in the trash.
Wow.
So I've just been a friend. It's always really neat. You have to be a fool, too.
It's a beautiful story. Very nice story. Thank you.